Okay, team, I think we can go ahead and get started if we're all ready. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Looks like we have over 100 attendees, so we're super excited about that. So my name is Angela DeMonbrand, and I am the Regional Director for Solar United Neighbors, and I'm joined by Katie Childs Ottenweller with Vote Solar as the Southeast Director. And we have our awesome backup team, Hillary with Vote Solar, who's going to start our presentation and progress the slides for us. Okay, great. Thank you, Hillary. So again, welcome everyone. I do want to take just a few seconds. If you're not familiar with Solar United Neighbors and Vote Solar, I imagine many of you are because you received this invite, but just really quickly wanted to share who we are. Solar United Neighbors is we envision a clean, equitable energy system that directs control and benefits back to local communities with solar on every roof and money in every pocket. We are a community of people building a new energy system, and Rooftop Solar is the cornerstone. Floridians, we are primarily known for our solar co-op programs. We help people go solar, join together, and fight for their energy rights. Vote Solar's mission is to make solar a mainstream energy resource across the U.S. And since 2002, Vote Solar has been working to lower solar costs and expand solar access. Both of our organizations are 501c3 nonprofits, and Vote Solar advocates for state policies and program needed to repower our electric grid with clean energy. So that is who we are. We'll progress our slides, please, Hillary. And there's our pictures. I'm again the Regional Director for Solar United Neighbors, and Katie Childs Ottenweller is the Southeast Regional Director for Vote Solar. And we're going to kind of tag team this presentation. So just a general overview. Imagine many of you are not just familiar with our organizations, but what net metering is, but I just want to kind of lay the groundwork here on what we're actually going to be talking about and what is actually at threat. So what is net metering? Overall, most solar photovoltaic, otherwise known as PV systems, are connected to our electric grid. These systems are called grid tied, meaning their electricity can flow to and from the grid. When your solar array generates more power than your home actually needs, that excess is sent out onto the local grid where it's used nearby, whether your neighbor or the closest building. Likewise, your solar array isn't producing enough electricity to meet your needs at night or particularly a cloudy day, you're able to consume electricity from the grid. This ensures you have a continuous supply of electricity. Grid-tied solar arrays are characterized by a two-way flow of power, so electricity flowing out of your home in moments of overproduction, utility electricity flowing into your home in moments where extra utility electricity is needed. So how do you get credit for that extra electricity you produce, and how does that affect your electric bill? The answer is net metering, and net metering is the policy that makes compensation for your solar electricity production possible, allowing you to offset your electric bill with that production. Net metering is a state level policy passed by state legislature, in this case, the Florida legislature. And now I will pass it on to, now that I've kind of laid the groundwork, I'll pass it on to Katie, who will be talking about what we're facing.
Hey y'all, so net metering has been the law of the land in Florida for over a decade. So why are we talking about this right now? So earlier this year, an organization called Energy Fairness that is very shadowy, and we've had a hard time sort of figuring out who is behind this. We now have pretty solid evidence that they're being funded by fossil fuel interests and monopoly utilities. This organization put out a report talking about how net metering is bad for Florida and the policy needs to change. It's outlived its usefulness and it's primed the pump. And so now we need to move to something that is going to value solar at a different rate. And obviously a lower rate is what they're interested in accomplishing. This report did not provide any independent analysis. There was no study along with the report. It's basically citing to other reports in other states that are also funded by utility interests. But that report landed on the desk of a state representative, clearly not by accident. That state representative then sent a letter to the chairman and the commissioners of Florida's Public Service Commission, asking him to revisit the regulation that sets the rules in Florida for how net metering is implemented. And the letter basically asked the commission to take this issue up and figure out a way to change this policy. It also provided some information that utilities had purportedly sent to this representative, demonstrating that there were subsidies at work and that rooftop solar customers were not paying their fair share. So the commission has now decided to hold a workshop. That's going to be held on September 17th at 9:30 in the morning. There are several stakeholders and utilities that are going to be presenting at that, including Vote Solar, but they've decided they're not going to allow members of the public to make oral comments at this. That's something that we have really pushed back against, and I think it's incredibly unfortunate, but that's what they're going for at this point. So what's at stake? Thank you so much for the slide change. So rooftop solar, the rule around that is what Angela described. It protects this value proposition for rooftop solar customers and ensures that when you send electricity onto the grid, you're getting a fair credit for that on your utility bill that you're allowed to use at night, kind of like rollover minutes on your cell phone. So that's one of the big issues that is really at stake here. A workshop is typically the first step that the commission takes when it's looking at actually opening up a rule. So part of where we're at now is communicating where are we at in Florida, and is it time for this policy to change, or are there really important public policy reasons for keeping it in place? So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of where we are at in Florida, and then some of the values that we're seeing from rooftop solar in Florida, and also cover some of the utilities' main arguments and why it's so important to debunk those. So just to provide a little bit of context, as of 2018, and these are like official government numbers, only about 1% of Florida's overall electricity comes from solar power. And that 1% includes utility scale solar farms, it includes community solar, and it includes rooftop solar. So rooftop solar is actually only a very small portion of that. Now, comparing that to natural gas, Florida is extremely over-reliant on natural gas. The average is about 35% in terms of what states, how much natural gas states are using to meet their electricity needs. Florida is double that at 70%. So the state is sending about $5 billion every year through our electricity bills out of state to bring in fracked gas resources. So just to give you a sense of what where we're at in terms of penetration levels. Next slide. With this, I'll turn it back over to Angela to talk specifically about rooftop solar adoption.
Sure. So as you can see from this slide, almost 60,000 Floridian households and businesses have gone solar, installing over 507 megawatts, but that is still only 0.5% of Florida customers. That I think we're 21 million of Florida residents. And so this is really seen and should be seen. This is a solution looking for a problem. To give some concrete numbers around some of our largest utilities and the actual numbers. So I pulled some directly from Florida Power and Light's website. They tout their largest energy company in the US measured by retail electricity produced and sold. And they have an estimated 10 million people that they serve. Of those 10 million people, they report a grand total of 16,000 net metered customers across the state. So that is our largest investor and utility. And to be fair, I also want to include an information part of this number also for JEA customers. JEA is the largest municipal utility in the state. They're actually the 7th or 8th largest in the nation, servicing nearly 500,000 customers. And they're touting net metering as a huge issue, and they only have 2,000 rooftop solar customers. And so you can kind of do the math. All the other utilities make up that nearly 60,000, but we're talking about tens of millions of actual Floridians. Again, a solution looking for a problem here. I think we have another slide. And for I think an incredible stark visual, there's Florida at the teeny tiny bottom in orange or yellow, whatever your color frame, and that compared to other states. That's rooftop solar as a percent of all generation in 2018. I don't think that moved much in 2019. So again, incredibly low adoption rates compared to the number of customers overall for our utilities altogether. So again, a solution looking for a problem, and this is why this is should be an issue we've got to push back at for the Public Service Commission.
So we want to talk for a couple of slides about resiliency, since I think that is something that matters a lot to us, particularly right now in the middle of hurricane season. More and more we are seeing an emphasis on solar and policies like net metering as a driver for solar to create more resiliency in our communities. We know that tropical storms batter Florida's coast every single year. They cause extended electricity shutoffs. When Hurricane Michael hit in 2018, there were 182,000 customers who didn't have power for over a week. If you're looking at older and medically vulnerable residents, any power outage is a crisis for them. And particularly in the Sunshine State, we have the highest percentage of senior citizens in the US and the second highest number of Medicare recipients that are electricity dependent due to medical reasons. That's over 169,000 people. So when the lights go off, it really is a crisis for these folks. Next slide. When we have households and institutions like schools, hospitals, and nursing homes who can access solar energy through net metering and then add backup energy storage, they are able to provide essential services to their community members, even in the midst of these emergencies when the grid goes down. And net metering has been shown to be a key driver to making those solar and battery storage investments, because battery storage is still a really expensive proposition. Next slide. And I just wanted to highlight one Sun member and solar customer in Florida who is such a great example of this. So this is Kathy Kirkland, who lives near Apalachicola. And after she installed solar and the power went out from the hurricane in 2018, she was able to invite all of her neighbors over. And she was the only one in her neighborhood that had air conditioning and electricity. They could charge their cell phones. I mean, these are the folks that utilities are claiming are being bad neighbors and not paying their fair share. But we're hearing these incredible stories about how solar customers are really creating resilience for their communities. And we need to hear even more of those stories from folks like you who are on this webinar. Next slide. So I know this is no news to a lot of us who work in this space. Floridians overwhelmingly want more solar energy. This is a poll that was done by Conservatives for Clean Energy. 77% of Floridians want to see more emphasis on solar as opposed to these other resources. Next slide. And that support extends to even a wonky concept like net metering. So 81% of Floridians view solar net metering as an important policy that they support. Next slide. I want to spend a couple of minutes on the common arguments that we hear from utilities about why rooftop solar is bad for Florida, because we're already starting to hear those pop up again. So even as early as a decade ago, when there were a couple of hundred people who had rooftop solar, utilities in Florida were already complaining to lawmakers and regulators that there were substantial subsidies that were being spent on these customers. I think it's no surprise that we see these arguments from monopoly utilities they lose revenue when folks go solar. And you know, in the same way that my grocery store probably doesn't love it that I go back and plant a vegetable garden in my backyard, these utilities don't love it when we're installing LED light bulbs or, you know, putting in more efficient insulation or high efficiency windows. And rooftop solar can help us to control our electricity bill. So, you know, their business model is diametrically opposed to seeing that revenue fall and seeing less load being produced in Florida, which means less opportunities for them to invest in new power plants to meet that demand. The problem is when utilities start claiming that because they are making less money off of you, you're not paying your fair share. And the principle there is that they are somehow entitled to make a certain amount of money off of customers based on some demand that they had in the past. Now, intuitively, this doesn't make sense to us because we know, you know, what happens on our side of the meter should be up to us. The utility shouldn't be able to penalize you when you leave the house for the weekend and don't use any electricity, or when you install LED light bulbs. In the same way, they shouldn't be able to penalize solar unless they can demonstrate that solar customers are not actually paying the cost to serve them the electricity that they're purchasing every month. And you know, that's where it becomes really important to see actual utility data, which we don't have in Florida right now, and to be talking about, you know, what does fairness mean? Are these customers paying their fair share? And studies have demonstrated over and over again that solar customers are paying more than their fair share before they go solar. And even after they go solar, they're still paying a utility bill every month, and they're still covering the cost to serve them, which is a lower cost because they have less demand. So when we actually get into the weeds and get past these talking points from utilities, we're able to really undermine this myth that they're presenting about cost shifting. And in case you're interested in this topic, Sun is doing an entire webinar next week that Angela will talk about the myth of cost shifting and all of the places around the country where that has been debunked. Next slide. So what's actually driving up electricity rates if it's not solar? This is a great study that was done by the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, a federally funded study. And basically they looked at different drivers that can increase rates. And one of them was rooftop solar adoption, at especially focusing on lower penetration levels, so 10% or less. And just a reminder that Florida is at 0.5% penetration right now for rooftop solar. So we're 20 times less than the numbers that they were even looking at. And what they found is the real rate increases are not coming from energy efficiency or, you know, increasingly efficient housing stock or rooftop solar adoption. It's coming, unsurprisingly, from new capital investments in expensive gas transmission and generation and grid upgrades that utilities aren't making. And if anything, having more distributed solar is putting less stress on those resources and making it less needed for utilities to be making those investments in the first place. But those expensive investments that utilities are making are planning on increasing Floridians' rates by up to 20% over the next decade. So all the more reason to be going solar and taking more control of your electricity bill, but certainly doesn't do much for that utility talking point. Next slide. So I want to talk about a few principles for a path forward for rooftop solar. And the first is that it's so important to really focus on everyone getting a seat at the table. A lot of the time what happens, and this is exactly what we're seeing at this workshop, the customer voices and the solar owner voices really get pushed to the side. You're not able to give oral comment at the meetings. If you do file comments, they get stuck in a docket and no one ever reads them. And so figuring out a way to make sure that all stakeholders, and particularly the stakeholders that are most affected by this because they've invested their own money in rooftop solar, should be allowed to fully participate in the same way that the electric utilities are able to participate. So that's a super important principle that we are going to be emphasizing throughout this process, and calling foul when it's not done in the way that it should be done. A second and really important principle is about customer control. Customers should be free to do what they want on their property to lower their bills without undue interference from monopoly utilities. In the same way that I can change out my light bulbs whenever I want, I should be able to invest in rooftop solar, and utilities should have to make some kind of demonstration based on actual numbers and not talking points, that is somehow harming the grid and not actually helping it. And they've had a very hard time making that argument in any places where we've had an actual data-based conversation. Another point that's really important to emphasize is we actually need more energy access and not less. So right now, 61% of rooftop solar adopters in Florida are making less than $100,000 a year, but only a quarter have incomes that are actually below area median income. So what that means is we're starting to reach the middle class, and that's great. And I think access to better financing options and things like that are helping. But we have a long way to go to make solar accessible to low-income communities. And those are the folks with really high energy burdens who absolutely need access to solar. And so we need to be having a conversation about how are we going to expand energy access? How are we going to look at the policy landscape and say, what more can we do to bring other customers into the fold, instead of talking about rolling back the policies that we have in place that aren't even meeting the goals that we have at this point. We've already talked about the importance of data. Gather all relevant information. Provide a stakeholder process where utilities are forced to come to the table with actual numbers so that we can show the benefits that rooftop solar investments are adding to the state of Florida. And if the bottom line is that utilities' profit-making incentives are just out of sync with what's best for the state of Florida, whether that be related to solar, energy efficiency, or other technologies, then those incentives need to be realigned to match what's best for the public interest and not the other way around. So having a conversation about what's really driving utilities' motivations here is an incredibly big part of the overall landscape here that we want decision makers to be aware of and be thinking about. And then also understanding the role of new technologies. And that's electric vehicles, it's smart thermostats, it's, more technologies that allow us to have control over our electricity use, and figuring out a way to actually mobilize those and bring more value out of those investments, as opposed to just trying to undermine the investments. So those are just some thoughts from us about sort of how we are thinking about this conversation, the way that we're going to be emphasizing to decision makers that we go forward. And with that, I will turn it back over to Angela.
Okay, thanks, Katie. So what can you do? I'm checking out the chat, and there's a lot of great suggestions, and everyone's on point. So the first thing is to go to savesolar.org/FL. Earlier, someone posted the Florida, but that doesn't seem to be working. So I want to make sure we'll post the savesolar.org/FL. Go directly there now. That's the first thing you can do. And at a minimum, please do that. And then also calling your commissioners and elected officials. There's a number right there, 850 number, as well as emailing Commissioner Clark. But we also have opportunity. We want to hear, that's just one thing, and it'll be compiled and they'll see that. And I think there's upwards of 1,000 people that have already taken action, I believe, and submitted comments. But we also want to be collecting your stories, even just at a minimum, a couple of sentences and maybe a picture of your array. If there's people from the industry and contractors and installers here today, like, we want to hear your story too, and how this potentially could affect you. It's the economic numbers, it's the job numbers, but also just, people that maybe don't have solar and they want to go solar in the future. This could affect your right to go solar in the future. So we want to hear why you support solar, what solar is meant to you, why does net metering deserve protection? And you can send that to our team, flteam@solarunitedneighbors.org now, as well as our comms team between Vote Solar and Solar United Neighbors. and others. We want to collect all those stories, and we want to strategically place some op-eds or letter to the editors, or just really across the board. I shared earlier the story that just went out of our co-op member Kathy in Apalachicola. That was just in the news today, so we're really thrilled. And that's really in the backyards of commissioners and elected officials that will be weighing this issue. We want them to read real people's stories. So please submit all of that information. Reach out to our team after this webinar, and so we can capture all of that. And again, it could be a minimum of just a couple of sentences that maybe Katie could use in her presentation to the commission. So with that, I think we have one more. I also posted in on the chat here, we have the cost shift, this myth of cost shift webinar coming up next week, September 9th. It is really some incredible national speakers that will be talking about this, because we're seeing this cost shift myth argument really across the board, not just in Florida, but across the nation, coming from utilities, and it's just incredible. And so we really need to squash this. I think we had one more slide, but I think it's really our final comment, and we want to we'll take some questions now, but first thing, you're on your computers or you have your phones, take action now. And also spread the word. Many of you, you're solar activists. You are really active in this sphere. You're familiar with Solar United Neighbors and Vote Solar, or you've joined a co-op, or you're just a solar champion. But maybe your neighbors are not. Maybe your neighbors see your solar and they're somewhat supportive. Share with your neighbors just a touch about the issue. Encourage them to take action as well, because this affects their future of going solar. So we really, really need to get the word out and show this commission how important net metering and rooftop solar is to the future of Florida, for the many reasons that Katie just went through, whether it's resiliency, the economics, your personal property rights, environmental. People Go Solar, we know this across the board from our now 59th co-op we're about to launch, is that people go solar for a slew of reasons. And this is not a partisan issue whatsoever. Across the board, people go solar for so many reasons that we can't count, but mostly it's economics, environmental, just personal property rights. This is why this brings so many diverse organizations together. So yeah, and with that, I think we'll take some questions. There's a lot rolling in. How can you get a Solar United Neighbors yard sign? Reach out, email us at flteam@solarunitedneighbors.org, and we will, we're working on that right now. I'll put this again in the chat. There's some, looks like there's some specific questions about some utilities. OUC, yes, they do participate in net metering. 1-to-1, I believe.
They do, but I think that is something that they've threatened to revisit in the past. So, you know, a commission change to the net metering rule will immediately impact all of the investor-owned utilities. So Duke, Tampa Electric, Florida Power and Light, and Gulf. But, you know, we also generally see a trickle effect where, you know, once state regulators change net metering, then the municipal utilities and the cooperatives feel more liberty to change their policies as well. So, you know, I think this is definitely a threat to kind of the statewide net metering regime, even if there's not an immediate impact on utilities like OUC. So I see a question about the grid tied system. So my understanding of Kathy's system and how it was set up, I know we've got folks who are much more technical about this than I am, is that her system is islandable. So when the grid goes down, her system automatically disconnects from the grid and can island, kind of like a little microgrid, because she has battery storage. She can store some of that solar on site and use it even at nighttime to keep the electricity on when the grid goes down.
Another question I'm seeing is, if net metering is the law, how are regulators able to stop net metering?
That is a great question. So it's a little bit weird how this happened in Florida, but around 2007, then Governor Charlie Crist put out an executive order and said, Public Service Commission, I want you to look at net metering. They started a process at the commission to adopt a rule on net metering, and they did that at the beginning of 2008. But right around the same time, the legislature passed some comprehensive energy legislation. And as part of that bill that was passed in 2008, just a couple of months after the net metering rule was approved, they made net metering the law of the land. So they said, utilities, you must net meter. And it was pretty clear that when they meant that, they meant you must all do, including co-ops and munis, the thing that the commission is making the IOUs do right now. But they didn't actually define what net metering means in the statute. And so there's a little bit of wiggle room that the utilities claim is there to define net metering basically in any way that they want to. So our position is that net metering means retail rate net metering, and the commission really does not have that much legal discretion to change the status quo. But that is certainly not the position that the utilities are going to be taking. And we've already seen some attempts from utilities like Jacksonville's municipal utility JEA to sort of take things in their own hands and very liberally define the way that, like, what the legislature actually meant. So we've got a weird system here where, you know, we've got a statute, we've also got a regulation. The regulation also has some really important issues that don't just have to do with kind of the crediting structure, but also have to do with, are there insurance requirements? So they require you to get a $1 million insurance policy if you have a system over 10 kilowatts in size. That's a decision that the commission made 10 years ago that is potentially up for debate now. They could expand that to smaller systems, they could roll it back. All kinds of things like interconnection and metering fees are implicated in the regulation. You know, whether you have to pay something in an application fee when you submit for solar. Right now, smaller systems don't, but that's something that utilities could go after too. Or whether you're subject to a standby charge or a demand charge rate when you go solar. So there's lots of ways at the commission level that the utilities could potentially try to undermine the economics of solar through some of these other fees, riders, and adders that, you know, normally we don't pay a lot of attention to, but the commission went through all of this a decade ago and made some decisions that really have been helpful in terms of the economics. Any other thoughts on that, Angela? That's a really important question.
I think you covered it.
I see another question about the rate that utility pays to buy back your excess electricity. Can you guys explain that a little more?
Yeah, so right now, the commission rule says that within an annual period, a 12-month period, your utility has to give you one-to-one credit. So you get credit for the solar you send to the grid at the same rate that you're buying electricity. And then whatever you don't use at the end of the month gets rolled over and you can still use it. Once you get to the end of that 12-month period, any excess you have at that point gets a wholesale rate credit. So it's basically the utility's avoided cost rate, which is a fraction of the retail rate. So if you've got excess at the end of the annual period, you get a check in the mail or you get a credit on your bill for, you know, a couple dollars, rounding up whatever it is that you've got left that you haven't spent in that time. So that's sort of a traditional one-to-one. Now, that annual one-to-one could be shrunk down to a monthly one-to-one or even an instantaneous. Our interpretation is that that is not net metering. You're not actually netting anything against anything else at that point. You're just treating solar users like wholesale power providers, which they are not. But the one-to-one is still intact as far as the investor and utilities are concerned.
I do just want to add, I see that some people are driving or hopping in and out. We are recording this and we'll be sending around recording to everyone who registered. I know there were some people who weren't able to get in because we had such a great turnout. So everyone will have the chance to watch a recording of this. Another question I'm seeing in the chat, someone is considering getting solar, but they're concerned that net metering is going to go away and they won't get a good return on their investment. What is your advice?
I feel like maybe that's an Angela question.
I would say
you deal with that all the times. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we can connect with our team. We'll see if we have an open co-op in your area. Second, definitely go solar today. Learn more. There's a ton of other questions that you want to make sure that it's right for you. This, there's, how this affects current is there's a ton of unknowns as far as like the people that currently have net metering in there, how it could affect potential their interconnection agreements that they have with their utilities. Very much this is similar to an attack that we just faced or with regard to national and our FERC and all of that. But this is more of the future of going solar, but down the road, and certainly we would continue to fight this, but definitely consider going solar today, and then join us to fight for existing and future solar rights.
Yeah, and in terms of grandfathering, I mean, so grandfather has to do with like, if you already have solar, are they going to keep you on the old rate, or if they changed it, would they roll everybody into a new regime? And, the commission has not said it's taking action. It has not proposed any new rules. And so it certainly hasn't addressed like how it's going to deal with legacy solar customers. I will say though, that in places like Nevada, where commission decided not to grandfather in existing customers, it was a political firestorm, the likes of which like the solar wars have never seen. And, I think that was a cautionary tale for utilities and commissions that, folks who have made an investment based on some understanding of a certain policy is in place, it's just a horrible policy to pull the rug out from under them. But all the more important for everybody to be really getting activated at this point and expressing how important this is for you and why you made this investment and how you want to, have utilities and your public servants honor that investment. Because at this point, we just don't have total clarity on how that's going to happen in Florida.
And that's the kind of important detail that would be really great if people could include in personalized comments to the commission. So when you go to savesolar.org /FL, I think that /Florida also works, and you'll be able to change there's like a form letter in there. So we have some suggested text, but it makes a really big difference if you customize that text to talk about your system, why you went solar, what this change would mean for you and your family. All of that personalization really makes a difference.
I see a question about contacting PSC members.
Yes, so just so you know, when you send a letter through that website, through savesolar.org /FL, it will go to all the individual commissioners and the docket.
And I also will say, like, there's nothing like picking up the phone. So if this is an important issue for you, like, having to listen to a voicemail is different from having to skim an email. So, especially if there are commissioners who live in your area. So we've got several commissioners in the Tampa area, one in the Panhandle, one in the Jacksonville area, reaching out to those folks and connecting with them, explaining why this is important. Like, there's just no replacement for that.
There's also a great suggestion from Charlie Behrens here about posting on Nextdoor. That's a terrific idea. We found that incredibly effective. So yes, if you are have Nextdoor as one of your social media platforms, do definitely post about this there.
I see a request to repeat the URL. It's savesolar.org /FL.
And I will also just repeat the request for personalized stories that you're sending to us, because we can help put together op-eds, letters to the editor, and even like have those folks highlighted in the presentations that we are able to give to the commission. I think part of what we are hoping to do is communicate there are real people who are affected by this. Here is who they are. they would have loved to address you today, but you're not giving them an opportunity to do that. And so, you know, doing our best to highlight how many people have taken action on this, you know, we're going to be really working to communicate that to commissioners.
And I see a question about city-owned utilities. Those are also impacted, correct?
So they are not directly impacted by the commission's rule. The commission doesn't have jurisdiction over municipally owned utilities or cooperatives, but they do tend to track with whatever commission policy is. So, you know, if we see FPL and Duke and TECO changing their solar policies, I would bet any amount of money that, you know, we're going to see these other smaller utilities follow suit. I mean, there's always outliers to that. We have some good municipal utilities that are very progressive, but for the most part, I think they're looking for an opportunity to, you know, make it harder for folks to go solar, unfortunately.
And Katie, even though public comments can't be submitted, this will be live streamed, correct?
Yes, so everyone will be able to watch the proceeding, and then I think that there probably will be an opportunity to submit written comments. I mean, we are taking the liberty of just flooding the commission with comments at this point, and I think that's really important, but likely after the fact, they will say, like, you know, we'll accept written comments for a couple of more weeks, but there is a risk that the chairman just stands up in the middle of the workshop and says, you know, we're going straight to a rulemaking, in which case, you know, we're going to have even more work to do to keep from getting steamrolled on this issue. And I see Angela just put up a link to the live stream on the 17th at 9:30 in the morning. So please tune in.
I think those are all the questions that I see. If anyone else has additional questions, feel free to throw them in the chat right now. Otherwise, Katie and Angela, do you have any final thoughts?
Oh, I see a question about an event outside the commission. So, you know, we had definitely thought about, is there a way to safely show some presence on this issue? Part of the problem is just COVID and like wanting to keep all of y'all safe and not having a bunch of people congregating in one place. I mean, there's always risks in doing that right now. And so we've decided against that. The other challenge is a lot of the commissioners are even attending these remotely. And so they're calling in from home. Typically there's a very small number of staff and the chairman will be present at the actual commission headquarters in Tallahassee, but all of the other commissioners will be calling in remotely. So, you know, even if a bunch of people showed up, not many people are actually going to see it. So, you know, we've opted against, you know, that kind of in-person advocacy. And we're really trying to double down on, you know, the phone calls, the social media, emailing, and, you know, getting on the website and doing activism that way, and just trying to, as best we can, given the constraints that we have, like presenting a real show of force around the groundswell of support that we have for rooftop solar. And with that, I think we could wrap up. You've got 13 minutes that we're giving back to you. So, you know, use that time to like go on the website, go on Facebook, tell all of your friends to, you know, save rooftop solar and really get engaged in this space. And we look forward to hearing all of your great stories and getting those in the right hands. So thank you so much for this time. Angela, anything else from you?
Not much more other than thanking everyone for participating. It's close to the end of the hour and we still have 90 participants. And so I just want to say thank you for hanging out with us. A recording will be sent, like Hillary said, with Vote Solar to all the registrants so they can see this recording. But still, again, I can't reiterate enough to definitely take action Share with your friends and neighbors, share all next door, your social media networks, reach out to us. If you're part of another organization that could also help us spread the word, reach out to me directly, Angela at soulunitedneighbors.org. And we can definitely share some communication stuff. So we're all on point and we all want to move this forward and really squash it now. So, and I'm looking at the participants. I just shout out to the tons of Sun members and supporters that have joined this today. You're incredible and we appreciate you. And definitely, I mentioned earlier, we have open co-ops right now. Don't let this dissuade you from spreading the news about co-ops and helping your neighbors go solar. We still have a federal tax credit. We need as many supporters with solar on their roofs to back this up as well. So don't let this dissuade you. Go solar today. Reach out to us if you want to know which co-ops are open. And again, thank you for taking a Friday at lunchtime and moving into your Labor Day weekend for joining us. We really appreciate it and take action today.
Thanks all.